All right, let's go ahead and get started. I will pray for us. Father, thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your word. Thank you for so many good things that you've given us, and for the upcoming spring break. Thank you for the rest and the opportunity that will give to us. I pray as we look at your word this morning, I pray that you help us. I pray in all of it that the Lord Jesus will be glorified, for it's in his name that we pray. Amen. So we're looking today at a couple of stories. One, Jesus and the man born blind. We're going to look at that story, John 9. And then a little bit more obscure story. Yes? Okay. Does someone have a blank sheet of paper they would send around, and you just sign in, and I'll make sure you get some. Okay, if you'll start, just make sure. Thank you for that. So what is today's lecture then about? What are we looking at? We're going to look at John 9, and the main thing to walk away with is that we're all born spiritually blind. That's the point that's being made, and that we're all healed the exact same way by washing in the sent one. So when we come to this story, and this story has some really weird details in it, if we step back, it's fairly easy to see that we're the guy. We're the one born spiritually blind, and Jesus is trying to teach us something about judging others and about looking at ourselves. The second thing we're going to look at is in John 5, which is the story of the man who had been sick for 38 years. And that story is meant to be read in light of Israel. That in many ways, that man is exactly like what Israel has done with God's grace. So these are the two stories that we'll look at this morning, John 9 and John 5. So let's start with John 9. This is what the text says. As he passed by, and the he there is Jesus, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? So the picture, the guy is sitting outside the temple. You might think of what we experience in terms of a mega church. If you've ever been to a mega church and you've gone in kind of the front door, that's where this man was. He couldn't go in because he was deformed. And so as he's sitting outside, excluded from the blessings of God, Jesus and the disciples are going in, and the disciples ask the question, why is this man in such bad physical condition? And their assumption is that it's because this man had massively sinned. Now, everything about that assumption is wrong. And the disciples should have known that it was wrong. If Jesus judged people and gave people based on the sins they committed, then every single person would be in hell. David, who had such grace with God, was an adulterer and a murderer and a hypocrite. Jacob was excluded because he married a woman and her sister as a rival wife and then fathered children with the hired help. all outlawed. He lied, used God in his lie. If God struck people down with sickness based on them being sinners, everyone would be struck down. But the disciples here are assuming that they're better than this man. That the reason this man was blind from birth is because somehow this man is bad, and they're assuming about themselves that they're good, or at least they're better than this man is. In other words, they looked at this man's physical sickness and assumed something about themselves spiritually and about the man spiritually. And that's completely wrong biblically. It's almost a miracle that Jesus just didn't say to the disciples, like, hey, have you been with me so long and you don't even understand any of this? But they ask this question and they assume that somehow they're better than this man. Now, it's going to help us whenever we come to a biblical story if we can get in the details of this story. So this is what the temple looked like. This is from the ESV Study Bible, very good historic reconstruction. This part of the temple was a wall, and only Jewish people could go beyond that wall. In fact, there were little plaques at each one of these entrances, and we actually have one of the plaques, and it said, if you cross this line and you're not a Jew, don't blame us if somebody kills you. That's what it says. So if you were a Gentile, you were excluded, you couldn't go in. But if you were sick or deformed, they wouldn't even let you in here. So this man is sitting at what's called the Beautiful Gate, and he's sitting there because that's as close as he can get to God. And as he's sitting there, the disciples make this just offhanded, very hurtful statement that the man could hear. Is it that he's this wicked sinner, or maybe his parents were somehow wicked and then God struck him because of his parents' sin? Everything about that is wrong in terms of what the Bible teaches. And Jesus knew it was wrong, but he's trying to help them see spiritual truth. The real truth that the Bible teaches, not what the disciples believed, was this, that all our every single one of our lineages meet in Adam and Eve. There's only one race. It's the human race. And we're all descended from Adam and Eve. And this is what it says about Adam and Eve. He said to the woman, did God say you shouldn't eat from the tree of the garden? The woman said, we can eat from the tree, fruits, but from the tree in the middle, God said you'll not eat from it. God said don't touch it. God never said anything about not touching it. She's making that up, or else Adam had made it up when he told it to her. This is the first legalism in the Bible. God gives a law, and then you try to add to that law to be holier than God requires. But she says, if you eat it, you'll die. And the serpent says, you won't die, but your eyes will be opened. And our foreparents gave in to that temptation, and it says the eyes of both of them were opened. This has to be the most ironic statement in all the Bible, because while their eyes were opened and they could see that they were naked, they lost the ability to see God. They could only hear God after that. Before they could see the spiritual reality that was God, But when they sinned, their eyes were opened. They could see things, but there were other things that they couldn't see anymore. They couldn't see God anymore. So their eyes were opened, but their eyes were opened with a spiritual blindness. And in fact, after this event, no one can see God as he is. Their eyes were open. They knew that they were naked. They tried to hide. The scriptures follow that up and talk about the spiritual blindness that we all have. It says their minds were hardened. For to this day, when they read the Old Covenant, the same veil remains unlifted, because only through Christ it is taken away. The Bible clearly teaches that every person who's descended from Adam is born with a spiritual blindness. There's just something that's not right spiritually about every single one of us when we're conceived. That's what the disciples should have believed. But they didn't believe that. They believed that somehow they were spiritually better than this man who was born blind. And Jesus is wanting to help them get over this wrong view. Because Scripture is clear that the only one who ever opens anyone's eyes is God. God opened her eyes and she saw. The Lord opened the eyes of Balaam and he saw. Elisha prayed, "O Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see." Psalm 19:11, "Open my eyes that I may behold." So when we come to physical blindness, what God wants us to realize is that this reality, when you look at the poverty, the pain, the isolation of physical blindness, what the Bible wants us to do is to realize that's every single one of our situation without Christ. That there's something that we just don't get in the world because we can't see God as he is anymore. And that's true of all of us at conception. It was true of the disciples. And so when they're walking in this megachurch and they're kind of judging other people on their way in, they're making a huge blunder. Now, have you ever had a friend who had to tell you a hard truth? Have you ever had a friend like that? And they tell you a hard truth in a way that you can understand it? I remember I was preaching at this big church one time, and I guess sometimes I have a problem with bad breath. And I was preaching at this big church, and I have a really dear friend who loves me, and I just appreciate this person who's been my friend for a long time, and he was there that day, and I was getting ready to preach at this church, and he came up to me, he stood right in front of me, and he said, "Can I give you a gift?" And I was about to preach, at this church, and I knew my friend was there, and I thought, this is unusual. I wonder what he's doing. And I said, "Sure, you can give me a gift." And he said, "Shut your eyes and hold out your hands." So I shut my eyes and I held out my hands. And he put in my hands about 150 lifesavers, individually wrapped lifesavers. It was so many that they were falling out of my cupped hands. And so I opened my eyes and I kind of looked at that and looked at my friend. He was smiling at me. And I got the point, like I had a problem and he was helping me in a gentle way realize that I had a problem. And even though that was a hard truth, he told it to me in a way that made sense and that helped me realize that he was for me, not against me, in telling me that truth. He came up with a creative way to do it. And, man, I appreciate that guy. He's a great guy and a wonderful friend. Told me a difficult truth, but in a way that was very gentle. But I did get the point. So Jesus wants to tell his disciples a hard truth, but he wants to do it in a gentle way. And so this is what Jesus did. As he passed by, saw a man blind from birth. The disciples asked, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus is wanting to correct this view and correct the judgment of his disciples. And so this is what Jesus said. He wants to correct an idea. He wants to correct this idea that people are basically born good and that we can judge other people. When you see someone in massive poverty, or if you see someone in affliction, you make this assumption, oh, I'm a basically good person and they're a basically bad person. So Jesus knows that all of us are plagued with this wrong theological view. He wants to fix it, but he wants us to fix it in a way that helps us embrace the truth rather than crushes us. And so this is what he said. Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but it's that the works of God might be displayed in him. When you look at this guy who's blind from birth, don't think, I'm better than he is, he's worse than I am. Think rather, this is an opportunity for God to be glorified. Now, there are so many applications to this verse. The one that I find most compelling is the one that C.S. Lewis uses when he talks about same-sex attraction. C.S. Lewis says he grew up in that whole English public school system where homosexuality was just rife, right, left, and center. It seems like that educational model of those very elite, they call them public schools, we would call them private schools. It just seems to foster that kind of misassigned sexual attraction. And Lewis had friends who would say, hey, I struggle with this. How should I look at struggling with same-sex attraction? And Lewis would go to this verse and say, this is an opportunity for you to live in the power of Jesus in such a way that God gets great glory in overcoming what is a challenge, what other people see as a challenge. Don't think of it, oh, what did his parents do wrong, or what's wrong with him? Think rather, this is so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And just as kind of a plug for that, probably the most postmodern city in the world is Oxford, England, where Oxford University is, and a place where new ideas are always the rage. There's a church in Oxford, England. I'm not sure the name. It may be St. Ebbs. It's right down the street from where the Harry Potter movies were filmed in that old, English college. And St. Ebbs has a pastor, Vaughan Roberts. You may have read his book, God's Big Picture, a wonderful book on kind of a big picture look at the Bible. Vaughan Roberts is pretty open and says, look, I've struggled with same-sex attraction my entire life. But Roberts says, I live a celibate life in the power of Jesus. He empowers me to not give in to temptation. That church, St. Ebbe's at Oxford, I was there Easter Sunday, I think 2012. My daughter had done a semester at Oxford, and I was traveling home from Italy to come home, and I stopped over at Oxford to see her. And we went to church. I met her at church that day, and that church is breaking the walls down with people coming in because they're willing to say, look, we're just normal people. We have normal problems. We have issues, but God is a powerful God, and God can change things. And it's taking this verse, don't look at it as a challenge. Look at it as this is an opportunity for God to be glorified. So when Jesus came to the man born blind, he says this is a great opportunity for God's power to be shown. He challenges their view, and he sees lack differently. He sees problems differently than we see those problems. Jesus said, we must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said these things, he spat on the ground and made mud. So they're about to go in, and Jesus says this is an opportunity for God to shine. And then he spits on the ground and takes some of the spit and mud, and he smears it on the man's eyes. Now I want you to think about that for a minute. You're sitting there all day. Maybe you've got a cup, and people throw money and you shake the cup, and you say, give a poor person some help as you go in to worship God. And don't you know that man had heard all kinds of things before? Don't you know he had heard people say, look at that freak. Why is that freak here? Why is he always begging as we go into church? Don't you know he had heard that? Don't you know that there had been little kids who, when he put that cup down, had kicked it, and he had to crawl on his hands and knees to find it? Don't you know that people had played tricks on him his entire life and mocked him because he was blind? And now the disciples had said this horribly hurtful thing. Is it that this guy's a horrible sinner, or maybe it was his parents that were horrible sinners? And all of a sudden he starts to hear something hopeful. This is for the glory of God. And then he hears somebody spit. And then the next thing he feels is this slimy stuff being rubbed all over his eyes. What would you think if you were the man? Would you think, here it goes again? Would you think somebody's doing it to me again? Here I'm helpless, I can't see. They're making fun of me. Jesus spits on the ground and rubs mud on the man's eyes. But then Jesus says, go, wash in the pool at Siloam. Now, we need a little help to understand that story. Because to understand that story, we need to know what Jesus is telling this man to do. If you go to BiblePlaces.com, you can find a map. This is a map of what Jesus told him to do. There at that gate, at the main gate, entering the temple, and Jesus is telling the man to walk from that gate. I don't know how he gets down, but to go to this pool, the pool at Siloam. If we were to put that story here on Bryan College, it would be almost the same as walking from this room to the red light at the main entrance. But think of that walking there if Bryan College were like downtown New York City in the middle of the day. Jesus is telling him to walk a long, long, long way. And remember, this guy has smeared mud and spit on his eyes. And he's trying to find his way down to the main entrance, and he's blind. And Jesus says, go wash in the pool at Siloam. Go wash the spit mud off your eyes. There's a model that often tour guides will take you to if you go to Jerusalem. This is a huge model. If you can see, this is like a movie stanchion right there. So a person would be, maybe that big. This is a huge model of Jerusalem during Jesus' day, and this is the pool. This is the pool, and Jesus is having the man walk all the way from right there to this pool. What do you think that walk was like? Think midday New York City. You're walking from here to the red light at the entrance, or even class change. Imagine walking down, you've got muddy spit on your eyes, and you're blind, and you're trying to get to the front entrance. What would that be like as you made your way down the steps and by the coffee shop and out the front door and through the student building and cross the street and go by the Stoffel Center and then all the way down the hill to the red light? Would that be an easy journey or a difficult journey? What do you think people would say on the way? Do you think somebody would say, look, there's that idiot from the temple, and why has he got dirt all over his face? Why does he have spit running down his eyes? I knew he was an idiot, but that guy's a moron. Why is he walking through this crowd? Doesn't he know he should stay home? Can you imagine hearing that? You're blind, you're feeling your way, or maybe some kind person would take you by the hand and you're walking, and with every step you make, you wonder, is this stupid or not? Is this person making fun of me? So many people have made fun of me in the past. Is this just another one of those? Is this like the kids that would kick the can and steal the money? What in the world am I doing? I wish I could find a picture from actual Jerusalem of the trek he made. I don't have an actual picture. The trek he made is on the other side of this hill, but this is that same hill that the pool was on. And notice, that's a person. And you would be walking to like right there. Do you think that would be easy to make that journey, middle of the day? This is what's left of the actual pool. When I was there in 1993 for the first time, this is what it looked like. You could pay money and you could walk in the tunnel. This is Hezekiah's tunnel. since then, they've begun to excavate the place, and so pulling the mud back, this is what it was like. This is the place. This is the actual place Jesus told the man to go. This is the main drinking water reservoir for Jerusalem. And Jesus told this man to make that long journey and to wash in those waters. And I want to ask you a question this morning. Why do you think Jesus did that? Did Jesus have the power just to heal the man, just to say you're healed? I mean, Jesus could raise people from the dead, right? Jesus could speak reality into existence. Jesus could have healed the man if he had wanted to heal the man immediately, but he chose for the man to make this long journey and to go wash in this pool. And I want to know why he did that. Well, where else in the Bible does it talk about mud or dirt or spit? There's a really prominent place in the Bible that talks about mud, dirt, or spit. What is every single person made out of, according to the Bible? Do you realize that when Jesus was putting mud on the man's eyes, he was putting Adam on the man's eyes? He was rubbing Adam all over the man's eyes. This man who was blind from birth had Adam on his eyes. Remember that you have made me like clay, that you will return me to the dust. That's what Job says. Well, where else in the Bible does it talk about spit? Is spit a good thing or a bad thing? Lord said to Moses, if her father had spit in her face, would she not be shamed 7 days? This was when Miriam criticized Moses for an interracial marriage. He had married a Cushite woman. Miriam didn't like that. She judged Moses, and God cursed Miriam, Moses' sister, with leprosy. And Moses said, don't let her be like one half dead, who comes from the womb half dead. She was struck with leprosy, and Moses pled for his sister. And God listened to Moses, but he said, if her father had spit in her face, would she not be unclean for a week? And so she has to live outside the camp. But clearly spit is not a good thing. There's no curative power of spit or anything like that. Spit is a thing associated with shame in the Bible. So realize that this man has Adam and shame on his eyes. And he can't find his way because he has Adam and shame on his eyes. And he's trying to make his way to the fountain with Adam and shame on his eyes. And perhaps someone was gracious enough to help him, but he has Adam and shame on his eyes. Job says, he made me like a byword. I am one before whom men spit. Clearly there's no curative power of spit. Spit is not a good thing. Spit is a bad thing. The weird thing is Jesus used spit all the time when he healed people. And Jesus was spat upon. Heals a man in Mark 8, led him out of the village. This guy, he rubs spit in Adam on his eyes, the Mark 8 guy, Jesus spit into his eyes. And he healed him. Another guy, Jesus puts his fingers in his ears and spits and touches his tongue. And I'm not sure if that's saying he spat on the ground, or I'm not saying if he spat in his hand and he put his spit in the man's mouth. But clearly Jesus often will use spit when he heals people. And you might say, well, that's gross. We're probably to think of it as gross. But if Jesus healed you from being blind by spitting in your eyes, would you want Jesus to spit in your eyes? Where does the Bible talk about blindness? Deuteronomy 29:4 says, to this day, God has not given you a heart to understand. God has not given you eyes to see. Leviticus 21:17, for no one who has a blemish can draw near, no one who's blind or lame. This man was excluded because he was blind. The Lord opens, and notice that, the Lord opens. Who opens the eyes of the blind? This person opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord God, Yahweh of hosts. Jesus, having said these things, he spat on the ground, made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with mud and said, go wash in the pool at Siloam. And remember how we said that every single word in the Bible means, every single name in the Bible means something? Well, an important question we should ask is, what does the word Siloam mean? And John anticipates our question that it means sent. In fact, technically, this is the word, and technically it means one having been sent. It's a perfect passive participle from the Greek word apostello, the word we get apostle from. Go wash in the one having been sent. You've got Adam on your eyes. You've got shame on your eyes. Well, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go to the one having been sent. And if you go get into the one having been sent, you can wash the Adam and the shame off your eyes. Now, I don't know about you, but do you think there's any kind of spiritual symbolism to that? Go wash in the one having been sent. In the Old Testament, that word Siloam is spelled a little differently, but that's the exact same word. And in fact, in the Greek text, it's exactly the same word, Siloam, wash in the one having been sent. Go wash. This is the water inside that cave, inside Hezekiah's tunnel, that fills up that pool. Jesus said, go wash. Before we take our mental break, just think about that. That walk would have been very difficult from here to the red light. And people would have made fun of that man on the way. But can you imagine how that man felt when he got in those waters and washed? And all of a sudden, for the first time in his life, he could see. Do you think the trip would have been worth it then? Do you think he would have cared what other people had said? Because here's what Jesus is trying to teach us. We all have Adam on our eyes. We all have shame on our eyes. And if we see spiritually, it's because we're washed in the one having been sent. There isn't anybody on the planet that I can look to and say, you know what, you're a bad person. You're a bad person and I'm a good person. I can't say that to anyone. Inherently, we're all exactly the same people. Inherently, we're all plagued with Adam and shame. My sin might not be the same as your sin, but I can guarantee you this, that if you could pull back the veil on my life and look at my life and see the inconsistencies in it and see the problems, and you would look at my life and you would say, that guy has issues. And you know what? The same thing's true of your life too. That it might not be the same issues as mine, but there are issues that are there. For every single one of us, we have problems that we have inherited because of the fallen nature that we inherited from Adam. We are all fallen people. We can't walk into God's presence ever saying, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? We walk into God's presence as forgiven people that Jesus in his merit has washed our shame away. Jesus has washed the Adam away. Jesus has given us sight so that we can see. There are wicked sins. There are wicked sins that people do. You read about the kinds of wickedness that people do in the newspaper, and you're just shocked by that. But the truth is that the same seed of corruption that led to that particular sin is the exact same seed of corruption that we all inherited at conception. And while we might seem immune to some sins now on earth, the truth is if God left us alone and gave us infinite resource, we would pursue every sin. Jesus is trying to graciously help us see that we can't judge other people. And so the way he chose to teach that truth to the disciples and to the man was by putting Adam on his eyes and then having him wash in the sent one. And when he washed, he could come away and he could see. Okay, so that's John chapter 9. We need to take a rest mentally for a minute before we close out our time today. How many of you are looking forward to spring break? Yes. Counting down the hours, the days. Can you believe this is week 9? There are only 14 and a half weeks in the semester. We're in week 9 now. Can you believe that? So, like, we're 5.5 weeks away from summer break. Can you believe that? We get we're a week, we don't count the week of spring break, but when we come back, we're 5.5 weeks away from summer break. So that's crazy because of the world. It seems like the semester just started. Anybody traveling over where, like going to exotic places? Anybody going to any exotic places? My son was going to Paris with his wife. They've been married about 1.5 years, and they'd saved up to go to Paris. And I was so proud of him that even though it cost him a lot of money, he decided not to go because he was afraid he would go and then get coronavirus. He thought he would be okay, but he didn't want to come back home and infect other people. I was pretty proud of that. That may not be an issue, though. It looks like our numbers here are going up. I don't know if you saw, a lot of colleges are actually doing their classes online. I think Princeton is doing their classes online. Michigan State, I think, is planning on doing. Weber State, and I think University of Florida has just talked about doing class online. University of Alabama? Wow. That would be kind of weird, wouldn't it? I mean, we all log into Zoom or something, and I stand in front of a whiteboard. And I know you wouldn't go get coffee while you're watching my lecture or anything like that, would you? I know what it's like to be a student. I remember in college one time we had a week where there was a snowstorm and we got off for a whole week. That was great. Until the school made us take it back by going to class on Saturday. You think an 8 o'clock class is bad Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? Try an 8 o'clock class on Saturday morning. It's like we were so great, when we were playing in the snow, and then we had to go like 5 Saturdays in a row to make those classes up. And it's like, I don't want it to snow ever again. That snowstorm actually traumatized me because it's the first time I'd ever been in a riot. So the university that I lived, the freshman dormitories were on this steep hill, right? And so whenever it snowed, the student body would do what a student body always does, and that is steal the trays from the lunchroom and ride down the hill, right? Well, in a very long-standing college, when it starts to snow massively, what does the lunchroom do? They don't put the trays out anymore. They've done this drill before, right? So when you have this blizzard snowstorm and you don't have any trays to steal from the lunchroom, what do? Well, of course, you break into the furniture and steal a couch and ride the couch down. And of course, you break into the hardware store and steal a canoe and ride the canoe down the hill. And of course, anybody who has to drive, you attack their car and you turn them around and push them down the hill. Because after all, you're a college student. You were made to live like that, right? I remember being in that thinking, wow, this is out of control. I thought we were out here just to throw some snowballs. And this seems awfully like a riot to me. Traumatized me. I'm an introvert. That's a little too much people out of control for me. Okay, so we rested, right? It's nice to have a rest. Thank you for resting with me. So, in the few minutes we have left, we just want to look at another story. We'll not look at it as in-depth as we looked at the first one, but a very similar story. Jesus and the man paralyzed for 38 years. The main point of this story is that the man is a picture of Israel. If you walk away with anything from this story, walk away with this, that this man is a picture of Israel. But before we read this story in John chapter 5, this is the Greek text of John chapter 5, verses 3, verses 4, and verses 5. And what do you notice about John 5:4? What do you notice about it in the Greek text? It's not there. What do you have, an ESV? Anybody have an ESV Bible, paper Bible? If you look up John 5:4 in the ESV, you know what you're going to find? it's not there either. It's going to go from John 5:3 to John 5:5, but there isn't going to be a verse 4 in the ESV. Is that true? Anybody look it up? I'm not making that up. It's actually not there. That's kind of strange, is it not, that there's a verse missing? Well, what's going on? Well, who put the verse numbers in the Bible? Like when John wrote John 5, did he put like verse 1, verse 2? He didn't. The guy who put the verse numbers was a guy named Robert Estienne. His Latin name was Robert Stephanus. And we know when he did it. He put the verse numbers in 1551. They were such a hit that in 1571 he did the same thing for the Old Testament. Before that, there were no verse numbers in the Bible. So Robert Estienne has given us a great tool because we have a way quickly to find any place in the Bible just by using the verse numbers and the chapter numbers. The chapter numbers go back to Stephen Langton in the 13th century. So before these two guys, there weren't chapter numbers and there weren't verse numbers in the Bible. And you might say, well, why are you telling me this? Well, when he put the numbers in any modern version of the Bible, they're going to be 17 or some have 18 blank verses. So you do the ESV, the NIV, the New American Standard, any of those, they're going to have between 17 and 18 blank verses. And the reason is, when Robert Estienne put the verse number in, he only had 5 Greek manuscripts to work from. And the 5 Greek manuscripts that he had to work from were all very late manuscripts. They weren't the best manuscripts that we have. He had 5, we have 5,000 today. When he put the numbers in, he numbered it according to the manuscript that he had, but the manuscript that he had was defective in a number of places. And so 17 times he assigned numbers to verses that don't have any right to be printed in our Bible. So English translations are faced with a difficulty. They could simply renumber the verses, but can you imagine trying to find John 5:58 and it was really John 5:57? Can you imagine if you tried to renumber the thing? So instead of renumbering it, modern translations will just omit those verses because they don't have a right to be in our text. This is the verse that he had that has no right to be in our Bibles. The verse that he had that we know from the other manuscripts was not in the original says this: for an angel at certain time would go down into the pool, and the angel would stir up the water. Then the first one, having gotten in after the stirring up of the water, would become healthy from whatever affliction they were being afflicted with. More than likely, this was a note that a scribe had written in the margin, trying to explain what was going on. And he wrote this note in the margin. And the guy who copied the manuscript after him thought that it was a verse, so he put it in the verses. And that's how the verse got in Robert Etienne's manuscript. But it's pretty clear that that was a scribal note and not what John wrote. Because can you imagine what it would be like in that pool if God stirred up the water and then the first one who got in got healed? Can you imagine what life in that pool would be like? Would you be a very polite person in that pool, like you see the water stirred up, or would it be kind of like day after Thanksgiving at Walmart and they're selling $3 flat screen, 55-inch flat screen TVs? It would be the right fist of fellowship, would it not? You would be yanking people back because it's only the first one who got in. God never does that in the Bible. But it's what a scribe thought was explaining was going on. And it probably is what the people believed at that pool. They probably did believe something like this was going on. So when you get to an older text, like the majority text, King James, the King James Version does include verse 4. It includes verse 4 because the King James was translated from the same manuscripts that Robert Etienne put the numbers in. But most people who look at this believe there's enough evidence that this verse isn't printed in any modern English translation. It probably is what the people believed, but this was not what John wrote. It's in none of the early manuscripts. It's only in very late medieval, in what's called the Byzantine text. This is one of the oldest manuscripts that we have. It's Codex Sinaiticus, and it says, a man sat there, and there were a lot of people. I love this. The guy who copied this manuscript made a mistake, and so he made a little note that he made a mistake. So he said, this is the word multitude. And there were a multitude of weak people there. They were blind, they were lame, they were paralyzed, and there was a man there. And so all of this is verse 3, and this is verse 5, and you can see it doesn't have verse 4. That's true of all the old manuscripts. So it's only the very, very late, the medieval manuscripts. And so if you're asking the question, should we print verse 4, we shouldn't print verse 4. Verse 4, the evidence just isn't there that verse 4 was what John wrote. But it is what the people were believing. They were at this pool because they had some kind of superstitious thing that if we get in first. But don't you know that was just every time there was just a little ripple in the water, don't you imagine people are just grabbing other people and trying to get it first? So we come to this story. There was, after then, a feast of the Jews. Jesus went up to Jerusalem. There was in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda. It had 5 roof colonnades, and in these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. So where is this pool? This is where the pool is, pool at Bethesda. The walls during Jesus' day were here. This is where the crucifixion happened. This wall was built shortly before 70 AD when Jerusalem was destroyed. And so up until that time, you can see that this pool is outside the gate. And if we go to that model of Jerusalem again, this is the pool. And I guess they're counting the colonnades this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess that's how they're counting 5. And you can see, if this is how big a person is, think about what it would mean to say there were a multitude of sick people here. They were paralyzed, they were lame, they were blind, and every single one of them believes that if I can get in this water before the next person, after the waters are stirred by the angel, if I can get in first, I'll be healed. I want you to imagine what that place was like. Imagine this guy is paralyzed and his family leaves him there when he goes to work. What happens when that guy needs to go to the bathroom? He's paralyzed. Can't move a muscle. What's he going to do? Imagine this whole place is full of paralyzed people. Paralyzed people who think, if I can get in first, who are just waiting, intensely waiting. Can you imagine what it smelled like when you walked in that room? This was called Bethesda, which means house of compassion. But this was anything but a house of compassion. This was a house of utter misery. I don't know if you've ever gone into a place like that, or maybe a nursing home where they don't keep things clean. You go into a place like that and the stench will take your breath away. I don't know if you've ever had that happen to you. That's what this place was like. And it says it was full of people in that situation. And then the text says this: there's a multitude of invalids. So imagine that place just as crammed full of paralyzed, blind, lame people. Just smell what that place was like. Think about the selfishness of that place, that you're just waiting for the split second for the waters to be stirred and you're trying to get in before everyone else. And you're excluded from the temple area because you've got problems. And this is what the text says, that Jesus went into that place and he found one man. So is it weird to you that Jesus goes into that place and like of all the people there, he makes his way to one guy? I mean, Jesus could have stretched out both his arms and just walked down and every single person there was healed, but the text doesn't say that. It says he went to one guy who'd been there a long time, and he was paralyzed. That's what the text says in Greek. He was completely paralyzed. Well, that's kind of strange, isn't it, if you're trying to get in first after the waters are stirred up and you can't move a muscle, right? Like, you could be 4 inches away from the water, and if you can't move a muscle, if it's first one in gets saved, that's not going to help you one little bit because you're paralyzed. And we're told that he had been there 38 years. Now, does the scripture mention the word 38 ever in scripture? And it does. It tells us that the time it took to go from Mount Sinai to the Promised Land was 38 years. Israel wandered in the desert. Israel was excluded from the presence of God. Israel could not commune. They were vomited out of the land flowing with milk and honey. They were outside the Garden of Eden, just like this man was outside the Garden of Eden. And they wanted to get in. The text tells us that to go from here to here takes 11 days. They ended up taking 38 years to get there. If Israel had obeyed God, they would be in the land flowing with milk and honey 11 days. Instead, they spent 38 years. This man had been excluded from the presence of God for 38 years. This one looked like he's living inside an open scroll, right? First one in. If I can only be perfectly obedient to God, if I can just be perfectly obedient to God, I'll beat everyone else and I can make it. I'll be saved from what's wrong if I can just perfectly obey the Mosaic law. But the problem is I'm spiritually dead. The problem is I'm spiritually blind. The problem is I'm spiritually paralyzed. The problem is even if it worked that way, it's not going to help me one iota because I'm paralyzed. I'm going to sit in this place called the house of compassion, but which in reality is a living hell, a reeking, stinking, nasty, selfish place. And I'm going to have a false hope that if I can just beat other people that somehow I'll be well. Jesus saw him there and said, "Do you want to be healed?" He comes up to one guy, he says, "Do you want to live here for the rest of your life? Do you like how your life's going?" Now, they come and they lean you up and they leave you here all day and you just foul yourself all day and you can't feed yourself and you just sit there day after day after day after day after day and you've done it for 38 years. Do you like this or do you want something different? And the man answered, "I don't have anybody to put me in the water when the water's stirred. And while I'm getting there, somebody else beats me to it." That's not what Jesus asked him. Jesus asked him if he wanted to be better, and the man's saying, "This is a game and I can't win at it." And Jesus, he didn't say it to the multitude. However many people were there, Jesus didn't say it to those people. Jesus said it to this guy, "Get up, take your bed, and walk." And immediately the guy is healed. Now, we don't have time to finish this out today, but if we read this guy is the most scandalous guy because he rats on Jesus when people start accusing Jesus. He's so ungrateful that he rats Jesus out. This is meant to be a picture of God having been gracious to Israel and Israel not responding in graciousness to God. And the truth is, if the truth's known, this is all of us in the world. And every single one of us has problems. And none of us are going to be the first one in. And the truth is that Jesus comes to us. And are we going to respond in thankfulness? Are we going to not honor Jesus? Surely we should honor Jesus because of what he's done. All right. Thank you for your attention today. I'll see you on Thursday.